Lootbound is not a bad game, and that might actually be its biggest problem. Here's the thing, there's not one huge disaster I can point towards and say, look, right here, that's why you shouldn't play this. Instead, I found almost everything in Lootbound just a little underwhelming. The combat is functional but incredibly basic. The rogue-like progression works but feels very grindy, especially early on. I found the loot system to have some genuinely interesting ideas, but it's surrounded by missing quality of life features. Yes, there's this little D20 you roll, and it feels like you get to make decisions, but eventually you realize how much of your run starts to depend on luck. And to my complete shock, somehow a lightweight turn-based game built around organizing simple inventories was launched without being properly optimized for the Steam Deck, which for me I think might be the biggest missed opportunity of all, because I think Lootbound could have worked really well as a handheld game you pull out for a run here and there. Hi, I'm Vadd, and in my review of Lootbound, I have to tell you, I kept waiting for it to give me a reason to care more about what I was doing, and for me, that moment never came. Lootbound is a dark fantasy tactical roguelite. You're going to start an expedition with a hero, you're going to choose a route through your map, you're going to fight turn-based battles, and at the end, the most important part here is you're going to pick up companions and gear. And as you go through your run, you're going to slowly build your party towards a final boss. The loot in Lootbound is the central system. Weapons and armor come in different shapes that you fit into small inventory slots in kind of a small Tetris little piece place puzzling game here. Most importantly here, what I want you to know is that equipment can interact with the pieces around it. So maybe one item will give thorns if it's near helmets, or maybe you have another item that gives you a bonus to attack speed or attack damage if it's near pants. Or maybe you got an item that needs a sword. You get the idea, right? The items build off each other, and this provides a small stat bonus that becomes much more valuable depending on how you've literally arranged your dude's backpack. This is an inventory puzzle, and it's easily the most interesting, intriguing part of Lootbound. At the same time, the problem here is that it's also where most of the interesting decisions happen. Lootbound has a combat problem. Combat itself is incredibly simple. You choose who to attack. That's about it. Yes, you can decide what to spend your mana on, you might have a stronger move, but sometimes it just makes sense to remove a particularly dangerous enemy first. I mean, that is about it. There's some, usable items, but most encounters eventually just come down to the numbers. Did you properly arrange your loot to get the most bonuses so that you hit hard enough? Did you properly arrange your loot from the previous fight so you have enough health and armor to sustain? Are your stats high enough for what you're fighting? That's it. To be clear here, Lootbound technically gives you a tactical choice, but for me, I never felt like clever combat decisions were what determined whether my run succeeded or not. It was much more important the work that had already happened in inventory management before the fight started. And I think this is a fine idea. An inventory-focused roguelite really is a good idea. But if you're going to make an organizing loot the centerpiece of the game, the inventory system has to be effortless, flawless, and perfect. That is the game, and Lootbound failed here. There's no quick sell all button, there's no quick swap button, you can't move all option, you can't auto sort. Oh no. The deeper I got into runs, the more time I spent manually dragging around individual pieces just to get my bonus back how I wanted it. Yes, that's right, the game's best system gradually becomes the biggest chore. Hey, if this review is helping you figure out whether Lootbound is for you, liking the video here genuinely helps the channel and tells YouTube more people want to see reviews just like this one. If you want to support the work more directly, I have a single pay what you want tier through Patreon and YouTube channel members to help fuel future videos. Thank you. I gotta tell you, on paper, Lootbound has a lot going on. Think about it. Turn-based combat, inventory management, party building, loot synergies, D12, that's dice with 20 sides rolling, roguelite progression, multiple heroes, different challenge levels, boss building. Haven't even talked about that yet. Frankly, it's an impressive list of just good systems and mechanics to have in your game. The problem is how little those ideas change what you're actually doing. There are 4 heroes, but I didn't find myself making fundamentally different decisions regardless who I was running with. Yes, you might organize their inventories slightly differently. You might have different equipment, but the basic loop stays the same regardless the hero, the boss, or the difficulty. Higher difficulties don't really ask you to understand new mechanics or approach encounters differently. The numbers just get bigger. Enemies become faster, stronger, harder to kill, and all of this makes the meta progression increasingly important, and this is where another problem starts to appear. When you fail an expedition, you only keep 85% of an important currency that you have earned throughout the run. This currency is important because you need it for permanent character upgrades. So Lootbound already expects you to fail runs, improve your base stats, and try again. I don't think it also needed to take an additional 15% of your end run progression away from you when you lose. It makes failure feel unnecessarily punishing. This creates a system where you already know a run probably is going to not end in a victory, but you keep pushing anyways because you need as many of your little crystals as possible before the inevitable loss. Yes, you can surrender once you realize your run is over, but you still need to grind for those upgrades because you need the bigger numbers. You end up spending time inside runs you already know are effectively dead, and then you get to the dice rolling loot system, which makes this problem even worse. You're going to be given choices between taking a safer, lower risk roll for some more basic equipment or a higher risk roll for a significantly better equipment. And early on, it's kind of exciting. Later on, once you understand what your build needs, what the run needs, how to win, that bad roll can tell you a surprisingly amount of information. All of a sudden, that early run is actually in a lot of trouble. You can make really good, reasonable decisions and then miss an important piece of equipment simply because the dice didn't land. And at higher difficulties, that randomness becomes much harder to ignore. I found myself early on recognizing I have a losing run long before Lootbound actually finished killing me. I had to grind that run to get those crystals to force my character to be a little bit stronger for that next run, and I knew I was going to lose. I missed that dice roll. I missed the second dice roll. My backpack is perfect, but I'm just not strong enough to win, and I know once I lose, I'm going to only keep 85% of my hard-earned currency. It's a bad feeling in that moment. During the runs, you have an option to learn some new abilities, and it's just an awkward the way the cost is attached because learning a new skill requires the same pool of resources you need to use that skill. I'm calling it mana. I don't know if the game has a different term. It's a blue bar. It's mana, right? Mana is that resource you need to use the ability, but you also have to spend the ability resource to unlock it, and it's a limited resource. You don't get a full restoration of mana after a fight. This means that you're pursuing a new skill, but you're also giving up an encounter where you could have earned loot because it's a branching path. You can say, hey, I'm going to go spend mana I need to fight to unlock a skill that might help me, but you don't know. It's random. But to do that, you're not going to get the loot that you know that you need. You end up spending a large amount of mana to acquire skills, and then you're struggling to regenerate that mana because you can't even unlock the thing you just unlocked. You can't even use here. There's so much punishment attached to something that I think should have made runs more interesting, and this is a reoccurring issue for me with Lootbound. The individual systems are interesting, especially when you explain them. They sound awesome, but stacked together, they don't make the game more enjoyable. They often just make it more restrictive. It's almost always better to just go to the fight, go get the loot rather than unlock a new skill or ability because it's such a punishing cost. It's just such a mind-boggling design decision here. Now you might be saying to me, Vadd, but tell me about the story and presentation. Well, it's a dark fantasy world. You've got some familiar RPG archetypes, the warrior, the mage, the bard, the paladins. There's a little camping feature where they interact. I really enjoyed that because I was desperate for something to keep me going. But every time I chose to camp with my team and heal them, I was giving up getting the loot that I needed to win my run. You're going to get a warrior, a mage, a bard, a paladin. You know, I never became particularly invested in these people or places because the focus here really isn't on the story or presentation. It's on the build, the tactics. It's on the repeat encounters here. Lootbound has progression, but I don't think it changes enough to undercome how repetitive this underlying game is. You've got some familiar RPG archetypes, but they don't really mean very much because, again, you're being punished if you use the camp to get that dialogue. You're not getting the loot that you need to succeed in your run. I think there is a best version of this game, and part of it is where the Steam Deck situation for me becomes frustrating. Lootbound does run on the Steam Deck. I didn't have any crashes, it played flawlessly, but the experience was not enjoyable because the controls and interface are clunky. The game clearly is not designed around that screen and control setup. There are so many good little widgets on the Steam Deck you can use to move around games, and it just missed out on all that. And it's so strange because I think handheld play could have changed how I felt about this game, because Lootbound is mechanically light and the battles don't require constant attention. Runs are repeatable. You're going to spend plenty of time sorting equipment, making small decisions, but this is exactly the type of game I see people picking up on a handheld and working through a rotation. You're going to play for a little while on the couch, move on with your life, make some progress, put the systems down, come back later. Lootbound doesn't need to become a dramatically deeper RPG with a stronger narrative or premise. Its simplicity is actually its strength for a handheld gaming session, but sitting at my workhorse PC, asking me to devote my full gaming time into it, there's just not enough here. There's too many things competing for attention in the genre, in the space, and adjacent. Getting Lootbound properly optimized and Steam Deck verified isn't going to fix the RNG, the progression, the lack of combat depth, but it would give this game a much more natural place to exist, to compete, and to market itself. To be clear here, I think there is an audience for Lootbound. If you're really enjoying the arranging inventories, you're going to get to keep doing that. If you like chasing the geared synergies, it is there for you. You're going to see numbers slowly improve, it's got that. And slowly grinding your permanent upgrades between runs, there really is something here. I really think the equipment system has real potential. When you find that strong piece of gear and arrange your backpack just right, all your bonuses line up, there's something satisfying about that moment that you take into the next fight, you tear it up because you are stronger. If you're the type of player who's looking for deep tactical combat by itself, that's not what's going on here. Or if you're the type of player who really dislikes heavy RNG, you're going to have a problem with the dice rolls here. There's a 20-sided dice that rolls, and it does not always roll in your favor. If you want a dramatically different character between runs that really changes things up, you're going to be disappointed because the similar decisions are going to continue to be made throughout the runs. I want to be very clear here. Lootbound is not a bad game. At best, it is functional. There's some good ideas here. I almost every time Lootbound gave me something interesting, there's this other side of the coin that immediately made it less enjoyable. I like the interesting inventory management. That's the core of this package, but it's missing basic inventory conveniences. I like the ability mid-run to unlock new abilities, but it's bought with a resource that's required to activate them. It's just too costly. I like the roguelike progression, but then I lose that progression when I fail a run. I don't like that. It's just too punishing. The loot choices are just too random. They can cripple a run before it's going to end. Multiple heroes and difficulties that don't meaningfully change how I approach the game feels like a mistake. This is a lightweight game that could have been perfect for handheld play, but it failed to bring the optimization it needed. Lootbound isn't a disaster. I just don't think being technically fine is enough. It's not a bad game. But right now, Lootbound feels like a collection of decent ideas that never becomes a particularly good reason to start another run. Maybe some updates can smooth out the inventory management in the future. Maybe the handheld experience picks itself up. At the time of review, Lootbound is awarded a 2 out of 5. I do not recommend.